than those a little bit further down. I don't claim to be an expert. I don't know for certain, but I reckon there's a lot of universities in, say, the middle portion of the league tables that are a lot better at supporting their students than universities at the top. Because on the parameters that are currently on here, the universities at the top are the universities that teach better, that have a higher quality of teaching, have a higher student satisfaction with the teaching, with the feedback, but there's no parameter saying the students are satisfied with the support they're getting, if you know what I mean. There's feedback, but that's feedback on the work. It's still related to the course material. And I would be extremely intrigued if there was a way we could quantify that sort of welfare side of things, stick it on the league table. I'd be fascinated to see how that would change the order of the league tables.
So during the pandemic, it was more focused on online learning and resources rather than anything else, because that was the priority. Because obviously, you know, the experience during the pandemic, you're isolated from your friends, you can't really meet with them, the library is shut, everything else is shut, so there's really nothing to do. So they were focusing on making sure that students have the resources rather than like mental health. I think mental health was not much of a priority than getting resources to students, making sure that students have the right reading lists, for example, or maybe students have the right support in their like modules, or making sure they're well prepared for exams or coursework or dissertations and etc. So mental health was not really much of a priority. But what I would say is before the pandemic, there was regular, there was an influx of communication, emails or notifications on mental health. So
if I remember correctly, the way it was at Aston was whenever we got, so I mentioned in the previous time that we have something at Aston called the Hub, which is basically the number one spot if you have like a question regarding pretty much anything to do with university. If in doubt, you can go to the Hub and ask somebody that question. And it was made abundantly clear from when I first applied to Aston, like not even when I first got there, when I first applied, I knew about the Hub, and we were introduced to the Hub, what it does. And I think a lot of people were comforted by the fact that they knew the Hub was going to be there, because in making their decision, they knew that they would have that support if needed. But anyway, in regards to the pandemic, I mean, I would say, I believe after the pandemic started, lockdown started in the UK, we received at Aston weekly emails from the Vice Chancellor or the Vice Chair of the Student Board or something like that, just with updates on the situation, how it's going. And every single one of those emails reminded us of what services were available if we were struggling. And I suppose in that sense, we did not receive weekly emails about that kind of thing before the pandemic. So I would say, yes, they did ramp it up after lockdown began. But equally, as IBK mentioned, there was a big focus on resources, a lot of departmental stuff. So in my case, the Department of Life and Health Sciences really were piling on sort of resources and letting us know that all of the lecturers are available to contact if we had any questions regarding our course. It was about sorting out how exams and how we would be assessed and graded for that year. And for my position, my dissertation was a laboratory research project for 2 months, and lockdown started at the beginning of the 8th week. So I missed out on the last week of my dissertation. So the first week of lockdown was sort of focusing on finishing off that last week and making sure we had all of our write-ups and all of our notes ready to sort of finish off our write-up. So yeah, there was a big focus on resources, similar to what IBK mentioned. But yeah, I definitely felt that there was definitely a slight increase in contact to us via email regarding what services are available if we needed help. But I would say that the students at Aston are reasonably well looked after at first anyway, because there's lots of different support services available in the first place. And like I mentioned, we're made aware at the very beginning that they are there and available for us. And I personally felt like I had several people I could have gone to if I had any issues. So I feel like Aston handled it pretty well. You know, it's gonna be a heavier burden on them being locked down, not being able to see anybody, not being able to go outside except for sort of one set of exercise and to shop. You know, it's going to be, and there's people who are going to have difficulties. There's going to be people who had plans that have been cancelled, maybe plans to go home that have been cancelled. And obviously the other disadvantage, and again, I can use myself as an example, is I missed out on the last week of my dissertation. That week was due to be us finishing up in the laboratory, you know, getting our final tests done, our final results recorded, which was going to form like a section of my dissertation, you know, and that work couldn't be completed anymore. So I had to stretch out the results I did have into my word count, if that makes sense. And I feel like a couple weeks to supplement the efforts to make that happen was probably a fair amount of time. It's just there's always going to be some individuals who are struggling more and would say that they needed more time, you know.
And you don't want to submit work that is substandard. You want to put your all into it, and when you submit it, you have that peace of mind knowing that, you know, you've done the best you can and you've left everything on the pitch, kind of thing. So that's the mentality I go with. So I just don't want to submit a dissertation that just merits a pass. You know, I want to submit a dissertation that's worthy of a first.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I needed that time to make sure that the introduction is right, the literature review is okay, the conclusion is fine, the methodologies are fine. Any research, any primary or secondary research I've done is up to scratch. So yeah, and the references, of course, are presented in a very professional manner. So yeah,
I think the vast majority of students would say that if they didn't get an extension, they would have rushed their final write-up. I think I definitely would have rushed mine and sort of cobbled mine together without too much thought if my deadline wasn't changed. And I think, to be honest, I would be very surprised if there was a single university that didn't extend that time period. And I think that was, in that sense, it was handled quite well. But I think it was just such a no-brainer to give us more time, you know. I think it's definitely a decision that had to be made. And our university certainly pulled through on it. I would be surprised if another one didn't, because I feel like it's only fair, you know.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to, like, I submitted my coursework right at the last minute. So I'm wondering how, whether in my mind, because I knew we were going to have an extra extension, whether I kind of eased off the gas or whether I was like struggling to meet those deadlines. Like, I'll never know. But I do think deadlines, I'm not sure if they would have helped the final result, because as you said, you end up like taking your foot off the gas when you know you got more time, kind of thing.
I mean, the way you have to look at it is this: we were at university to study, to learn, to get our qualification and to graduate. That's the point of going to university. Obviously, you've got everything else that comes with it: making friends, having a good time, societies, and there's a massive list of things. But at the end of the day, the bread and butter of university is that you are learning, you're getting your degree, and you're graduating, and you're leaving, and you're moving on to employment or onto further education after that. So it makes sense that their priority was to focus on us getting our dissertations done and them arranging their exams. And I feel like a lot of people, we always keep going back to mental health. It's a good basis to talk about this on. There's going to be people whose mental health was affected by the lockdown because they would have been worried about not getting their dissertation done in time. You know, that would have been their main concern that was potentially driving, you know, anxiety or something else. You know, it would have been very pressurizing, especially if you might have been a little bit behind, you know, in the first place, and then you'd been worried about not getting an extension. So I feel like it was the right thing in that sense for the universities to focus on supporting us academically. It's just obviously finding the sweet spot of combining that with support elsewhere, like with everything else that comes with university, because you're going to have extroverts who aren't going to be able to go outside anymore, apart from one session of exercise a day. They're going to be holed up in their rooms or their uni flats or their uni houses. Some people, obviously, if you live in a university house with a few of your friends, you're still going to have friends in your house. They're in your bubble, but like there's going to be people who, like myself, lived in a flat. So I was on my own. There were a few people in my flat, but I couldn't see them or socialize with them. It was, awkward at times with using the kitchen and things like that. The corridors in my building were quite narrow. There's so many tiny issues that come up with this kind of thing. And, there's only so much the university can do, but then you have to turn your attention to the actual staff of the university as well. Like the students are looking to these people for action. We were expecting action from them to help us, but they're under just the same amount of pressure and strain as we are, because they're the ones providing the education for us. They're providing all of these services for us. Our lecturers have to mark our dissertations and return them within an allotted window. I believe my research supervisor had to finish off the research we were doing. So like the bits and bobs we had left over in the lab, he had to go in and personally finish it off for us just so we could get our results. There's so many pressures for the staff as well that that's why it was so difficult to get a perfect response to it all.
So to Nathaniel and IBK, do you think the university should have been more prioritizing the health, like outside of the services that the uni provide, or do you agree with Will that they should be focused mainly on the service because that's their sole purpose? They're there to give us, as Will said, give us the degree and then move us on, kind of thing.
I think
like CSR, corporate social responsibility, that's a growing issue now as well, with companies now realizing they've got to do more outside of their purpose other than their sole reason for operating. So yeah, what do you guys think?
I think universities are, they have a cost as well as a responsibility for students, right? So in my opinion, they can't go outside of their remit. So if they're invested in students outside, like if they're invested in the outside issues that students go through, sort of like their health and stuff like that, then it's going to take more pressure it's going to have more pressure on the university in terms of their time, in terms of employing staff that specialize in these facets of helping students out. So I think about that as well. So I just think that I don't know, it's kind of subjective university by university in terms of how much support they give their students. So I just think, universities should be more focused on, delivering their service as they promised in their prospectuses, where they, paint a utopian view of a heavenly based university with nice flowers on the cover and, smiley faces and university houses that look like mansions. They need to stick to their word, kind of thing. That's what I think anyway, because not every university delivers on their promises, especially when they have rankings of being first in the Guardian newspaper or whatever. That can be very misleading, I think. So students need to read in between the lines a little bit and gather their own intel from students that have been in their own position in terms of how their university has treated them and how they can work around it.
I think a lot of people, some people struggling through this pandemic might have thought, I can't cope with university. I would like to, freeze things and, come back to a later date. But, an individual emailing the university, there's uncertainty, so one person might say, yeah, that's fine. Then the university will be like, well, no, we've never froze anyone's position. So you failed your coursework and exams. That might have caused people to have added anxiety on top of this, like the uncertainty. So do you think the university should have come out and been shown more clarity and gone, right, these are the options, to try and kind of ease people's minds, kind of thing? I think it was to do with the options. Like, do you think the university would have been better to have more clarity in giving you alternative options, like to freeze your degree and things like that? Or do you think that would be unfair because obviously previous students from previous years, they might have had their own, anxieties for things that are not pandemic related and possibly not really given that opportunity? So, yeah, do you think it'd be fair for them to offer people to freeze their degree during the pandemic and then resume at a later date?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea because during the pandemic, you lose a lot of motivation related to do with, you know, to do with excelling at your degree. So, before the pandemic, you might meet up in the library with a group of friends and you might organize study sessions. You might say, okay, let's go to the library after lectures from 2 p.m. till 6 p.m. And then after that, we can grab Starbucks and then we can have dinner and then we can do the same tomorrow. But that does not exist in the pandemic because everywhere is shut. So it's your responsibility. It's your sole responsibility to ensure that you organize your time. So in that case, when you're demotivated and you have no incentive to study, it's more likely that you're not optimized. You're not mentally optimized to get the best grades possible. So it's a good idea to freeze your degree and then carry it on after the pandemic. So that means you have access to the university's resources, such as the library, books, teachers, workshops. Face-to-face workshops and things like that. So, because I think momentum is a very important thing. And, when you have the momentum of having a very successful academic year, you want to carry that on. Into the next academic year. The pandemic really stopped all of that momentum. So if you had a very successful first year and etc., the pandemic halts that momentum. So that means you have to start again from scratch, and then you have to regain that zen that you had in the year that you were successful at. So to answer your question, I think that's a good idea because taking a break does really help as well. So you can regain your focus. And so many students, I think this happens to every student. There's a time where you think to yourself, why am I actually doing this degree? You start questioning yourself. You start asking yourself, would it be better if I did something else?
I think regarding that, I think it's never a bad thing to have more options. If that option was available for at my university, for example, I personally wouldn't have taken it, but I'm sure there are some people who would have taken it. It's always a good thing to have more options available. But at the same time, I think in a way, that could be a negative thing that on the surface looks like a positive thing. So obviously, again, it's situational depending on the individual, but say there was somebody who was struggling with anxiety and was struggling even more under the lockdown. If they then, let's say they were working on their dissertation towards the deadline date, if they were then given that option to, you can freeze your degree, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a lot of people in that situation would snap at an option like that because it looks like it's a good idea. But then when they've done that, they're in their university accommodation with nothing to do at all. And if you have a dissertation to do, you've got some work to do, you've got a purpose, you've got something to work towards, you've got an end goal, it gives you a purpose, it gives you something to do, if you know what I mean. Whereas if you then take that away to freeze the degree, sure, it takes away the stress of having to meet deadlines, but there are some people who need that purpose, that goal to work towards, if you know what I mean. And I feel like some people in that situation would snatch at an opportunity to freeze their degree or whatever the opportunity would be, and then come to regret it. Obviously, you could probably reverse it, but then they would have even less of a purpose than beforehand, if you know what I mean. So I feel like it's a good idea because it's good to have options available, but at the same time, it could cause further issues down the line in a sense like that. And I think it'd be very, very, universities would have to be so careful introducing an option like that, because I feel like while it would benefit some people, it could also really disadvantage some people as well. It's very difficult, obviously, to gauge just how successful or unsuccessful something like that would be. I just wanted to go back to what we said last time about putting a mental health support satisfaction score on the league tables for university. I think that's we all agreed that was a really, really good idea, didn't we? And we were saying that the main thing that universities, and again, it goes back to the point I mentioned earlier, that universities are there to teach us and to get us to graduate. That is the purpose of university at the end of the day. And we agreed that a small parameter on the league tables for something a bit more personal, something a bit more community driven, something that is a bit more, makes you feel more included, something that isn't to do with the uni and the course. So I've just whipped up, as an example, the Guardian 2021 Best UK Universities League table, right? And these are the parameters on there. Guardian score out of 100%, and all of these are out of a percentage or some sort of ratio. There's satisfied with course, satisfied with teaching, satisfied with feedback, student to staff ratio, spend per student, average entry tariff, value added score, career after 15 months, and continuation. The only one to me on that list that is in any way related to like welfare and student support and all that kind of thing is student to staff ratio. And even that on its own isn't a direct personal thing. That's obviously
very subjective.
Yeah, so that's relating to course sizes and the number of people you've got in your lecture hall and the number of staff you've got to support. For my example, it would be like the number of lab technicians and support assistants in the laboratory we would have, because the labs were huge at Aston. Anyway, none of those parameters are directly personal welfare related parameters. And I feel like there should be at least one, if not more. But I think if there's a way in which we could ask students at university, are you satisfied with the mental health support? Did you feel happy at university? Did this university make you feel at home? Did this university comfort you when you needed it? Did this university provide solutions for you when you required them? I could go on and on and on with things like that. There surely is some way we can quantify how well a uni performs in terms of student welfare. And I absolutely think that is something that should go on the league tables, because I think, and obviously this is a very forward thing to say, but I reckon a lot of universities towards the top of the university league tables would get typically lower scores than those a little bit further down. I don't claim to be an expert. I don't know for certain, but I reckon there's a lot of universities in, say, the middle portion of the league tables that are a lot better at supporting their students than universities at the top. Because on the parameters that are currently on here, the universities at the top are the universities that teach better, that have a higher quality of teaching, have a higher student satisfaction with the teaching, with the feedback, but there's no parameter saying the students are satisfied with the support they're getting, if you know what I mean. There's feedback, but that's feedback on the work. It's still related to the course material. And I would be extremely intrigued if there was a way we could quantify that sort of welfare side of things, stick it on the league table. I'd be fascinated to see how that would change the order of the league tables.
It's true. And actually, think about it more, there should definitely be one parameter on mental health. And I think there should actually be one on safety in general. Because actually, when I'm thinking about it, safety at university, that is something very, very extremely important. Think how many students go on clubbing, go to pubs on a night out, and there's weirdos hanging around the university. If there was a score that showed students don't feel as safe, that would force the university to work with local police or whatever to make sure more people are patrolling a certain area, or the university's more aware of, certain people lurking in certain areas so they can try and do something about it. What do you think, IBK, like, as in to Will's point of, there's not even like one thing related specifically on student safety and health and like mental health and physical health?
I really agree with what Will said in terms of making welfare an important part of ranking, because that could easily tip the scales. Because again, students that have come from sixth forms where they've been heavily supported by teachers and helping them to get the grades that they deserve may really benefit from going to university that has a high rate or rating of welfare. So there are some students that can, they can just get A's and A stars or B's by themselves individually. But there are some students who need the support or constant feedback from teachers to say, okay, you can improve by putting more references in, you can improve by quoting the author more. They give them tips and they actually work on those tips. But at university, that's not the case. You have to be the one to reach out to the teachers. And some teachers, some teachers are receptive, some teachers are not receptive. There are some teachers that don't really help students and stuff. But that's kind of besides the point. So I think that would really help students in terms of gearing towards their advantages and playing to their strengths in terms of, if students are going to heavily benefit from welfare, then yeah, it should be a thing that, because when, so yeah, I think it should be, because we are the ones that are investing in our education. So surely we should have more of a bit of a say on, how personal it can be for us, just a little bit. So I think in the coming years, if something like that can be introduced, that would be a massive benefit to students. Because I personally think that students are starting to wise up to the fact that university is not worth it, and they're considering other options that could get them to the same place, but with a better experience. So there are companies that have integrated degrees as well as work experience. So some students may choose to go towards that direction because they feel that they would get the experience as well as a globally recognized qualification. So I think universities do owe it to the students, because we are the ones that are being taught. We are the ones that have to read the books. We are the ones that are eventually graduating and going to use that knowledge for our future jobs. So yeah, I think having something like welfare would really help students a lot, because when even though you look at the rankings, you can see how highly these different parameters are ranked. So your preference might be to choose a higher rating of student to teacher ratio over maybe, I don't know, social events or whatever, because that might be your preference. So having more options available to the student to choose, it's important because it puts us more in control. So yeah, that's it.
So should we think of parameters then? That, like, what parameters do you think would be beneficial then? Like,
I was just gonna say quickly. I mean, now you're talking about I was just gonna ask actually. Do you think then lecturers should be trained additionally in terms of regarding mental health support? Because I'm just thinking some teachers, and I think I've heard this, some teachers will they might argue, well, we're only here to teach. If you're having problems, go speak to someone else. And so I just wonder what you guys think. And they also have to mark our work as well. So I wonder what you guys think.
I
They
think
maybe need additional training.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I think there's two kind of sides to that, because I do think it's important actually that teachers are given that training to be able to assist students, because that is a very important part of their job. Some teachers, they don't really have interpersonal skills. They're quite cold. Like, they're very, very smart and academic, but they're not very good at communication. And when it comes to someone's needing mental health support, they might struggle in that. So that's a skill gap that they should be working on to make them better as a teacher and an individual, like, you know, to be able to deal with these kind of things. But then I guess some teachers argue, well, they're bombarded with so much work and like they can't keep up as it is. And now they've got all this additional stuff on top. So I guess you could argue, well, if that's the case and they're doing more work in terms of mental health support, then either their working hours gets reduced and it gets kind of they're given more time for mental health training and slightly less hours for working, or their salaries increased.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point you mentioned. Like,
So I think on the league tables there should be two new parameters. There should be student welfare and staff welfare. And what welfare encompasses is mainly from, I mean, obviously, I'm sure you were the same at your university. You had surveys emailed to you all the time regarding how your course is going, how are you getting on with your lecturers, how are you getting on with the coursework, how are you getting on with the exams, etc., etc., etc. If there was, say, a monthly survey sent out to every single university student in the country, and a monthly survey sent out, a slightly different survey, but on the same lines, sent to every member of staff at every university in the UK. And then we just collect, the data's collected, and we can see trends over time, and universities can work out where to focus their efforts onto. And I think if that is then translated into a number, put on the league tables, and that affects the position of certain universities, I absolutely think that would act as an incentive for universities with weaker scores to then address problems. I think it would give students a larger voice. It would give staff a larger voice as well in terms of getting the support that they need. It would influence people's decisions when selecting which university to go to. Like, quick question for you three. If you looked at the league tables and saw, for example, that Coventry, obviously I'm not saying that Coventry does, but let's say Coventry had a sort of a below average, sort of a reasonably low student welfare score, would that have not necessarily stopped you from applying there or going there through clearing or whatever, but would it have definitely raised a concern in your head about going there?
If it was 1, 2, and 3, I would have ruled it out.
Really?
For sure.
Yeah, would have been a factor.
So right there, I mean, that's 3 people from one university. You know, I'm sure the majority of university students, both past and present, would agree with that. I would be surprised if it wasn't the majority. So I think I'd be very interested to speak to some university staff about this, because I think that while awareness is gradually improving for student welfare at university, there ain't too much for staff welfare. And I remember there was some lecturers at my university went on strike regarding salaries or wages or something. And, you know, we see that kind of thing on campus occasionally. And was it when we were in first year or second year that there was sort of across the country, you know, lecturers striking, students joining in with protests and things like that. Like, that should have raised alarm bells, but I couldn't tell you what action was taken off the back of that. I don't know what happened following that. So, and that's just, I mean, it might just be me. I don't know if you guys know, but, you know, it's all about awareness, isn't it? And I just think if those 2 parameters were on the league tables and influenced the positions of universities, it would definitely act as an incentive for universities to work harder on providing better welfare services for both students and staff alike. And I think it's absolutely something that should be campaigned for, you know?
I got a question actually, and that is, well, I've got a lot of questions, but when you were filling out these surveys, was you skeptical in thinking that your results weren't actually anonymous and that it would actually potentially affect your grade, so that you slightly adjusted to kind of combat that?
I don't remember that, but if I did do it, it would have been subconsciously. But I don't think I did. But I say I don't think I did. But like I say, subconsciously I might have. And I feel like people, especially people who are struggling more at university, would definitely have actively changed their answers if they had concerns regarding that.
Yeah, because I find it odd. Literally every module I did, they would send out the satisfaction like 2 weeks before the end of the module or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, to be honest, it's better if you get that after you've received your grade.
Yeah.
Because that's a bit, why send it 2 weeks before the end when you haven't completed your module yet? And obviously, if you're unhappy with a teacher's marking and things like this, and you've tried to complain, because I've tried to go through a complaint process in the past, and you get into a bit of an argument with it, then obviously your satisfaction is going to drop, and you can't change, the satisfaction you've given. So it's almost as if, you're doing like 80% of a module, and then you're given a score then when it should be after you've completed it.
Why they do that?
You know how, like, I guess as well for staff members, certain staff members are going to be more openly spoken than other staff members. And even though these forms might be anonymous, I reckon some people could figure out who said what based on their comments, So it's not technically fully anonymous.
I'm sure.
Yeah, so some teachers might be fearing what they're saying. They might feel less job secure, and students might feel their grade will be influenced. So all these things could sway someone's judgment. I think I noticed in my emails, it said something like, your satisfaction will be, they'll check up on us in 18 months' time and see if we've been employed and all that kind of stuff. So I guess will affect the tables, but 18 months down the line. I'm not sure if we affect the tables now, like through what we said so far. I don't remember I don't really think I remember a specific survey that was related to the Guardian or Complete University Guides, rankings or whatever. Do you guys think you've done anything, like filled anything in to do with that?
No, I don't think so.
So it's like, will we be asked in a year, 18 months? And if that's the case, will we forget certain things that are important now and, kind of not really consider them in like that far down the line? Because that shows it's job focused rather than student safety and mental health focused, if you get what I mean. And I get why it's job focused, because like the majority of students, the reason they go to university is get a good job out of it. But I'm just saying that shows that it's weighted more towards, graduating and getting a job than any other metric.
The league tables, I don't know how recently the league tables have been changed, but if they haven't been changed in a while, that they need to be sort of modernized in a way. And I think these issues are so prevalent, especially given the pandemic, that they've all the frustrations that people have had in the past have sort of bubbled up to the surface. And during the pandemic, this kind of thing has been focused on massively, providing anyone and everyone with any support they need, And I just think university life shouldn't be left behind. It's definitely something that needs to be integrated in somehow. And I think something like adding it to the league tables is just it's very important, because like I've mentioned, it gives it's not just the students having the incentive to go to university, but it gives the universities the incentive to improve, if you know what I mean. And that's what some of them need to do. There's probably some universities out there that are doing a great job, and the majority of their students are really happy, and they managed okay throughout the pandemic. But there's probably some universities out there that are really struggling with it. And I'm sure it all boils down to money and resources and staffing and all that kind of thing. But having a number that the university can be matched with in terms of welfare, I think could lead to a lot of improvements up and down the country, and I just think that's very, very important,
Hopefully that stops universities from keep thinking they got to like build another building for like another £100 million and things like that. Because that's what I feel like they're doing. They spend all this money in, let's add another building, and we can put that on our prospectus and show, look at the new facilities here. But in actual fact, you can create all the best state-of-the-art facilities But if people aren't happy and not, then they're struggling with their mental health, then it just goes for nothing, doesn't it? It's pointless.
That's true.
Yeah. Remember the last time saying this was a radio show. Call 0800. Yeah. But yeah.
Is there actually a mental health helpline that our universities provide that are specific from the university?
Nope. Not that I know of, anyway.
They just tell you to go to Samaritans. Well, I don't know if Samaritans, but you know what I mean. Like them.
I think they have there's a number you can call, but the problem is, so many others are calling, so you'd be just waiting there for hours.
Yeah, what we had at mine was like loads of stickers on the back of our flat door of like different numbers and organisations we can call depending on what our problem was. So I felt like those options were there. A specific line through the uni, like apart from the hub I've mentioned, which you sort of have to, you can email them, but obviously then you don't get an instant response. You sort of have to go in if you have a problem. Yeah, there were numbers, but they were sort of all organisations and things that are sort of widely known anyway.